Howdy, everybody. Good morning. Here we are again, back at it. Episode 12, Anomalous America. Hope everyone can hear me okay. I've been having some strange audio issues. StreamYard. It's going to make sure it's working properly. Gives everybody some time to get in here. Okay. Looks good. Excellent. Yeah, here we are. It's what happens when your baby bangs on keyboard keys. Default keyboard settings and microphone settings get changed and you don't even realize what's happening. But yeah, it feels good to finally be getting this series back. Kind of, my whole reason for starting the channel really was this anomalous America kind of adjacent material that I had been hoarding for so long. And the format had always kind of stuck in my head. And yeah, it's been a long break. Um, Sherry, Alex, Joe, as always, Joe, thanks for being here. Bernie, good to see you. Thanks for being here. New and old, many feathers. Always such wonderful comments. MF Jones, good to see you. Yeah, good night. Good morning, good night. Depends on where you're at or what your lifestyle's like. Um, this is kind of be kind of an interesting mashup video. Um, I'm going to go over a few things, and I've decided that I mentioned this lightly in the Louisiana episode, but we're just going to follow the Mississippi River up, probably to Ohio, maybe farther even, maybe, maybe Minnesota. I don't know. Um, yeah, yeah, yeah. I did burn out a little bit, and then not to mention on top of that, we went out of town for my youngest turned 2, and then I had my birthday, and then we were out of town for the 4th of July, and then yeah, a little bit burnt out, and then a whole lot of um, vacation. So good mix. But yeah, it's easy to do, especially when um, for a while there I was giving every spare second I had to trying to get videos up, and when you have a whole family and 3 little kids who want every spare second of your time, it's an interesting it's a kind of a juggling act that I'm still working on, obviously. But I appreciate everyone's patience and yeah, it's been fun. And yeah. So Mississippi, right? Obviously the state name alone is gonna stand out. I need to break this chat away here 1 second. Okay. Yeah. So again, Mississippi, state name. Um, let's just pull up Wiki here just for the silly little details of such and kind of get a background. We're going to spend a little bit of time um, going through Google Earth. Even though it glitches for me, it doesn't record the glitch or show it for you guys. So, we'll just kind of deal with the strobe light effect. But it's worth it. For those that don't remember, my first kind of video slash interview was with a good friend of mine, 13th Monkey, who has built up the largest star fort um, archive that there is, and he has more time on Google Earth than anybody, I would say. Perhaps aside from maybe a coder or two that worked for Google, but even still, I'd say that predominantly that would be AI driven. But um, years ago, on the hunt for star forts, we found a lot of old Civil War maps, and that seemed to be kind of the bread and butter for star fort maps. And it became incredibly obvious that the Mississippi is covered with star forts, or was. Stellium, hey, Mike, good to see you. Thanks for being here. And you know what? Let's just hop into Googler for a second. Man, I should probably share my screen. We'll just read a few statistics here real quick. I kind of realize I need to go a little more basic with these. And I'm going to try and do that with my articles. I'm going to kind of reduce the amount of articles and just kind of focus more on the material and kind of, I guess, direction or point of view I have for what America was like, before the 1860s, before the 1900s, but predominantly then. So, yeah, for those that don't know, Mississippi is on the Gulf of Mexico. And if you've been following the series, you remember Louisiana. I know it's been a while. Louisiana was our last episode. And I think that was a great introduction into kind of what we'll be talking about here. Mass, canal, levee, land work, dredging on a scale that's, in the horse and buggy days is unrivaled. And the ironclad Civil War, for those that don't know, an ironclad is kind of like a ship that 80% of the vessel is below the waterline, and they were made of iron, some of them, some were not. And it was this type of vessel that was the only reason that the North was able to even have a fighting chance against the South. The South was a far more advanced and far wealthier place. Now, for those that haven't looked into this Civil War, there's a lot of good material out there questioning whether the narrative is what we're told or if it even happened. However, the Mississippi River was an absolute crucial thoroughfare to America, and it was probably one of the most important arteries of the South. And if it wasn't for the North's crazy bankruptcy investment into ironclads, they would have never had a chance. Now, these ironclads are the only reason they even made their way up the Mississippi. Now, in this time frame as well, they did have submarines. It's much harder to find good material on them, but they've uncovered a few that were sitting on the bottom of the Gulf. Found a few in Florida. There's been one or two in Alabama and one or two in Texas. But anyways, the ironclad was really important, and it was the reason that they were able to penetrate so far up the Mississippi, because they were able to destroy a lot of these star forts. Now, you've heard me mention in the past what I thought a star fort was, and you know, um, our classifications of star forts. I think again, the purpose of some was certainly a defensive positioning, redoubt type of situation, but the majority of them existed long before the Civil War, long before. I've shown some powder horns from the 1700s in the northeast of America that show many of the large rivers, Hudson, etc., covered. That every city had a large star fort, long before the whole concept of the French and the alliance of such, and who the French were is also in contention. I mentioned this a little bit in my Louisiana video, and it's an important thing to think about because Supposedly, the French were the ones building all the ironclads for both the North and the South. So, big conflict of information there. Who was really building these? The South had the ironclads before anybody else, supposedly. Brian, good to see you. Um, Now, what does that really mean for everyone else? And the Napoleon narrative with the Louisiana Purchase, um, the transition of lands. There's just so many interesting um, things that stand out in that time frame, and the Civil War is part of that. Mississippi plays a big part of that as well. Um, I think the majority of this episode is going to be highlighting. Again, we're going to go back and talk about river names. So for those that have already heard me talk about this, bear with me, but I'm sure a lot of you haven't. We're going to show the ancient river names of America correlate with the entire world. I want to show a little bit of uh, mound design, mound pottery, and yeah. So I'm wasting time. Lots to say. So just quick overview. Mississippi is state in the southeastern region of the United States. See the map over here. Again, many of you this is silly information, but I just want to cover some of it to get back to the basics here. It became a state on December 10th, 1817. By 1860, Mississippi was the nation's top cotton producing state, and slaves accounted for 55% of the state population. Now, that's a narrative that I won't be discussing in this episode, but it's very worthwhile. Um, Cootie Mayo, I check out his channel. You've heard me talk about him a lot. We've done a few things together. He has a lot of really great information about this, kind of showing what was really going on in the 1800s on the Mississippi River. It's quite a different narrative than we're told. And who was really running the South? Who were the Confederates? Really interesting stuff. Especially when you look into the term Confederates when it came to the quote Native Americans. And yeah, there's a lot of overlays there. Black leaders in the South, white leaders in the North. It gets really interesting. But yeah, it's a subject for another video, perhaps. But constantly be um, questioning what we're told. Again, I come from a family that has um, fought in the Confederate War. Um, I have 4 or 5 generations just in Georgia alone, going back well into the 1800s. And I'm familiar with this narrative. I grew up with it. Pictures of family members. So it's interesting. You know, I believe that there was some kind of war. I think the historical reasoning and perhaps what was actually going on during the war, the technology being used and stuff like that, that's part of kind of what's been hidden away. And the French, the role that they really played, again, talking about Napoleon, and um, Napoleon favored the South, and what that really represented, why Napoleon was, whether or not Napoleon was even a real person. Again, getting off subject. So before I waste any more time, I'm gonna hop on Google Earth here and just kind of do a quick little look around. Nothing crazy. A big thing that you've heard me discuss as well in the past is we've talked. You can see the strobing on my face. Pretty awesome. So we'll just get rid of my camera here. Um, you've heard me talk about the changing of the Mississippi. I've been saving my 1812 earthquake material, New Madrid event, probably for Missouri, for obvious reasons. But we're going to touch on it in Arkansas, and we'll touch on it in Tennessee, and we'll cover most of it in Missouri. But the Mississippi River stuff, like what lies beneath and what's changed, it's going to get really juicy the farther up the Mississippi we go. I'm just going to show a few of the little star forts. Again, they're nothing crazy, but when you look at old maps of the coastline. It's quite different. This is the same thing I pointed out when we were talking about Louisiana. Okay. You can see the canals here, the canal structures, levee systems. Um, they're insane and they're prehistoric. They come long before the quote Indians, just like a lot of the more complex mound systems come before. Again, there were um, Native Americans that were building mound systems, but there are several different kinds. We'll get into some of those. But to zoom in really quick here, here's one we found. Doesn't seem like much, but these are important. Especially, like I said, as we go up the Mississippi, we'll show, you can see the date there, 1699. Um, doesn't seem like much, but again, the changing of the course of the Mississippi is really an important factor here because just on Google Earth, we're going to be able to show um, this is a quote battery. Someday we'll get my 13th monkey on here again, and we'll kind of break down the nomenclature for star forts, um, and why they use terminology like that. I believe they were converted old technology for war. Um, yeah, when you see what they had to do to get cannons in some of these, it's pretty obvious they weren't designed to support cannons. But yeah, so just hop onto the Mississippi here, show a few more. Now, one thing I really want people to notice, and for those that haven't heard the some of the stories about what happened during the New Madrid event in 1812, the Mississippi changed its course. The entire length of the Mississippi changed its course, and in some places it ran backwards for more than a day. Um, as we get farther into it, we're going to discuss that the ground moved like the ocean. I'm sure people have seen images and video where the earth starts to roll like a wave, right? It looks like liquid during an earthquake. Now, this whole region was affected by something similar to that, and the ground was rolling like waves, like liquid waves, and then froze in place, and huge hills were created. You can see the meandering of the river. It's changed its course so many times. Um, they did a great study of this in the early 1900s and had really amazing maps. I wasn't able to find my original material for, but basically they just show how this river has um, gone all over the place, and the silt beds and the things that it's covered are pretty incredible. I'm going to overlay this map really cool, really in here because I thought it was interesting. Pretty cool old map. Um, you can see some of the old forts. Um, Again, we'll go through Civil War maps another time because they're worth a video on their own. And the narrative of the French building all the forts is very interesting. But just wanted to show this pretty cool little overlay here. But like I said, you try to do an overlay like this before the 1800s, and it's not even going to be close. Whole cities were wiped off the map when the Mississippi um, overflew its bounds. So yeah, nothing crazy there. Just wanted to try to spend a little time on Google Earth every episode. And yeah, I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's just get into some articles here. Um, First one we're going to talk about is I've done a video on before, but again, for those that haven't seen it, it's important information to cover. Yeah, so this is called the Age of the Western Hemisphere. This is from the mid 1800s. Evidence that it was inhabited by man before the flood. Now, I've covered material like this ad nauseum, but you'll see the relation and why I'm kind of starting out with this. A course of lectures on Egypt and the Egyptian is being delivered in one of the churches in Chicago. The minister has evidently made a long and careful study of the subject, and his object is to prove the authenticity of the Word of God by the results of recent archaeological research in Egypt and Palestine. Now, as we get farther up the Mississippi, we're going to make a whole lot of really interesting correlations to, America and Egypt, and why those words are synonymous, and why, again, following through the whole Anomalous America series. And for those that are new and haven't seen any, um, please go back and you just pick one. And, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, the amount of Egyptian overlays that we find, um, that I find and cover is pretty crazy. And, but yeah, so America as Egypt. And as we get closer to Missouri and Tennessee, and there's some interesting stuff we'll cover in Arkansas as well. It's going to get really, really crazy. Referring to the examination of images and bas reliefs in Egypt, he recently called attention to the extreme age of these works of man. Many of them are the sculptured images of the Ramses, the first kings of Egypt. Um, as we get farther, or closer, I suppose, as we move along the Gulf of Mexico, we're going to cover a book called King Ramses, the Father of America. It's a book written by an author from the 70s or 80s, I can't remember which. And he shows the iconography between some of the Indians of Florida being an identical match with that of King Ramses. And he postulates that King Ramses King Ramses III's reign was actually here in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, if you have seen my video on Queen Mu, it's a member series video, but it's available to everybody now. I strongly recommend checking out my Queen Mu video. There's a lot of overlays there, and it's going to connect a lot of dots between the Yucatan, the Gulf of Mexico, and why this region was Egypt, or was called Egypt, or known as Egypt, prior to some kind of cataclysm and a huge migration of people, um, towards the Mediterranean. But, anyways, back to the article. But the remarkable fact connected with these researchers is that although many of these monuments have been unearthed and the ancient hieroglyphics contained on them have been deciphered, not one has been found which will disprove a biblical statement. But on the contrary, many of them verify the historical statements of the Bible. The estimated age of the oldest of these sculptured stones is 44,000 to 5,000 years. Now, again, why the Anomalous America series has been so fantastic is we have, such a depth of material that really shows, um, the dates and at least the historical narrative. Now, in my Colorado episode, we talked about, one of the governors of Colorado who was pleading for help from the U.S. government because the Smithsonian was, not only were they tearing down ancient buildings, not only were they stealing priceless, relics, weapons, all kinds of stuff, they were also stealing mummies and they were shipping them to Europe. Now, again, referencing Mayo's work, and we've done like a six-part series together now. And, behind the scenes, we've discussed this quite often, but it seems very likely that much of the historical narrative of Europe and at least the Nile Valley has been kind of prostituted by relics from America. And that a lot of the oldest mummies, in fact, the majority of them, come from America, Mexico, and South America. Now, again, we've found mummies from Alaska, and I don't have any good mummy stuff for Mississippi. I'm sure they existed, but I don't have any in my archive. We're going to cover some in Arkansas, and we're going to get into a bunch in Tennessee and Missouri. So, going to keep that kind of clock rolling with the whole mummy narrative. But why this is important is that, again, a lot of what they were using to identify, time frames and historical narrative stuff, more than likely was stolen from the American Southwest and shipped to Egypt. So that was what even a governor of Colorado was claiming in the 1800s, pleading for help. These people are, you know, falsely attributing these historical places and shipping everything to Europe. Although this period of time appears to be remarkably long, it constitutes but 1/20th of the age of the remains of man recently found in the United States. So yeah, kind of spoke before that great sentence there, but yeah, so 4 to 5 thousand years is 1/20th the age of man recently found in the United States. Now, if you'll remember, um, Emperor Tigrinus, the first Tesian mummy they believe ever, or the oldest, my apologies, was found in New Mexico. And they went as far as to say that they were the remnants of Atlantis post some kind of event. The continent of America is often designated by the appellation of the New World. But the researches of modern geologists and archaeologists have shown that the evidences in favor of high antiquity during our geological epoch, as well as our fauna and flora, are, to say the least, as great on this as on the Eastern Hemisphere. Again, kind of why I wanted to start out with this, because it's going to correlate a lot with what we've already been showing, that the megafauna, megaflora, and the tropical sort of vapor canopy age that existed all over America and is shown quite clearly in the fossil record here in America. And what went along with that? Well, giant men and giant reptiles, mammals that we've shown pretty much in almost every episode. Professor Agassiz, whose authority will hardly be questioned in matters of this kind, tells us that geology finds its oldest landmarks here. And Sir Charles Lyell, the noted geologist, from a mass of well digested facts and from the corroborating testimony of good authorities, includes that the Mississippi River has been running in its bed for more than 100,000 years. The authorities in support of the extreme age of the geological era to which man belongs, though startling to the unscientific, are not simply the opinions of a few, but are substantially adopted by the leading geologists everywhere. Now, again, this is kind of why I've fallen in love with the newspapers over the years. Um, is you can see a much more authentic, evidence-driven um, kind of positioning by these so-called authorities or you know academics, and that changes a lot, especially by not about 1920, 1930. It's like if you're not university backed, you're speaking as a university, not as an individual, and your work doesn't speak for itself anymore. It's kind of your credentials, and that's kind of where we're at today. But in the 1800s, it's these you had hundreds of men dedicating their entire lives, living, sleeping, breathing this stuff, and creating, quite substantial amounts of evidence. I don't want to say proof, but good evidence. And the Mississippi is, been the obsession of countless writers, from the 1700s all the way up until the early 1900s. I'm sure even longer, but with the kind of authenticity that has disappeared. Although antiquity so extreme for man's existence on Earth may shock some preconceived opinions, new facts have familiarized the minds of the scientific world to this conviction. The monuments of Egypt have carried us far beyond all chronologies heretofore adopted. And when these barriers are once overleaped, it is vain for us to attempt to approximate. The plain on which the city of New Orleans is built rises but 9 feet above the level of the sea. Now, we talked about this a little bit, and the same is true for a lot of the Gulf states in general. The amount of levee canal work, and it's prehistoric. It existed before the quote Indians that are there today. When we get to Florida, we're really going to show this. We're going to show that there are canals there that are so ancient and so massive, and the bottoms of these canals are lined with some of the most huge, gigantic ancient trees. What came first? How could a canal come second to a huge, giant, petrified ancient tree? And the size of ships that some of these canals were designed for is mind boggling. It's the same with the steamship era. Even some of these companies that were building steamships for the Mississippi were using, as they stated, um, the ancient um, thoroughfare, the ancient canal works. They will require dredging um, beyond imagination. It's the same kind of overlay that I wanted to cover with the New Orleans. If you haven't seen that episode, go back. We kind of go over that a little bit, and we're going to talk about that more here. Rises 9 feet above the level of the sea. The excavations are often made far below the level of the Gulf of Mexico. In digging for the foundations of gas works, the Irish spadesmen, finding they had cut through timber instead of soil, gave up the work and were replaced by a corps of Kentucky axemen. So think about this, you guys. They're building levees and excavations, right? Strengthening them, digging down in the ground, and they find a standing forest. Okay. So the spadesmen, men with shovels, give up and they bring in a corps of Kentucky axemen. So they literally uncover a standing forest who hewed their way down through 4 successive growths of timber, the lowest so old that it cut like cheese. Abrasions of the riverbank show similar growths of sunken timber, while stately live oaks flourish on the banks directly above them and are living witnesses that the soil has not changed its level for ages. And then once we get farther up the Mississippi and we talk about the New Madrid event, we're going to see that we're dealing with successive events, as we've been showing several times now in many of my episodes, that we're dealing with civilizations built on other civilizations. And the Mississippi is showing us the same thing very clearly. Messer Dickinson and Brown have traced no less than 10 distinct cypress forests at different levels below the present surface in parts of Louisiana. Now, this continues all the way up the Mississippi. So this is why we're again covering this here, because it's the same thing on the Mississippi. It goes all the way up, in the middle of America, where the range between high and low water is much greater than it is in New Orleans. These groups of trees, the live oaks on the bank and the successive cypress beds beneath, are arranged vertically. Really important. Okay. So we're not dealing with like one big event. We're dealing with like several layerings. And we're not just like talking about these thin little layers that geologists in different parts, especially where I'm from, I was really big into geology as a child and quite obsessive with rocks and thunder eggs. And I spent a lot of time as a kid digging for thunder eggs and all kinds of different quartz and crystals. And the geologists would explain these different layerings, right? These different layerings and the ages and geological epochs that went into these layerings and how absolutely nonsense that was. And here we are, we're dealing with 10 vertical layers where the top 4 or 3 were solid. And just the imagery here in this article is part of what I love so much. Just imagine, you got these basically Irish slaves working for pennies on the dollar, digging down through the mud, and then they're hitting trees, and then they have to hire another company of lumbermen who chop down 3 more layers. In the fourth layer, the trees are still vertical, but they're like cheese, and they in some places go down as far as 10 levels of successive forest. So this is the largest layering event that I've ever been able to find. Now, does this mean that there's been 10 different events? I don't know for sure. But as we've shown pretty much from Alaska all the way to now in Mississippi, there's been at least four significant events, at least four, that have buried not only forests, but civilizations. And as we move up the Mississippi, we're going to show one or two layers of city infrastructure that exists. Where was I? My apologies. Calculations have been made by Dr. Bennett Dowler of the time of growth of each era of flora as found. Cypresses 10 feet in diameter are not uncommon in the swamps of Louisiana, and one of that kind was found standing vertically in the lowest bed of the excavation at the gasworks. Okay, so now if for those that have seen a bit of my work, you'll be familiar with my radium series where I've started to talk about gas, gas, make gas, natural gas. I also work oil into this whole narrative, the oil industry, the natural gas industry, and its relation to radium and why this is important. Um, and these oil and gas companies, coal companies are finding insane stuff when they first start excavating and doing their drilling. And this is a perfect example. The estimated age of such a tree with 95 to 120 rings of annual growth to 1 inch is 5,700 years. So they found a standing cypress tree in the lowest bed. So we're dealing with some serious time frames here. Now, what's important to remember is that you can date a cypress fairly easily. However, due to climate, rings do develop faster. So these dates could be off slightly, but still, we're dealing with 10. That's what I want to focus on, not necessarily the ring, but the levels of buried, rebuilt. I mean, think about this. A buried forest, and then enough time for another forest to grow, and then a buried forest, and then time for another forest to grow. It's crazy. When I first read this article, I read it probably like 4 or 5 times. Like I just had the hardest time wrapping my mind around it. The calculation to avoid all ground of Seville was only made for 2 consecutive growths of these trees. So they were even actually they retarded their generalization just because they were dealing with such a substantial amount of time. As the age of the two generations, 11,400 years, and the excavation at the gasworks above referred to burnt wood was found at a depth of 16 feet. And at the same depth, the workmen discovered the skeleton of a man. The cranium lay beneath the roots of a cypress belonging to the fourth forest level below the surface and was in a good state of preservation. The other bones crumbled to pieces on being handled. The type of cranium was, as might have been expected, that of the Aboriginal American race. Now, that's a slippery slope because as we get farther up the Mississippi, we're going to show that there were probably as many as 5 or 6 different types of brain skulls found in the mounds in America. So that's kind of put an asterisk on that term, but very interesting nonetheless because we're dealing again with a burial beneath a cypress tree, and this was very common. Um, it was common to bury people and plant a cypress tree on top of their burial. I've covered this with Dr. Longo several times. There was a cypress tree that fell in Florida, and they found 600 bodies, skeletons, below one of these giant cypresses. So this is they've been doing this for a very long time. If we take then the present era at the calculated age of 14,400 years and add 43,200 for the three subterranean groups, again, these numbers, take them with a grain of salt, but still you have to wrap your mind around that we're dealing with a forest, with 100-foot trees, then another forest, and then another one, and then another one. Each group to the living, we have a total of 57,600 years. From these data, it appears that the human race existed in the delta of the Mississippi more than 57,000 years ago. And the 10 subterranean forests discovered, with the one now growing, establish the fact that an exuberant flora existed in Louisiana more than 100,000 years earlier. So that 150,000 years ago, the Mississippi laved the magnificent cypress forest with its turbid waters. What then is the significance of a mummy or monument found in Egypt 4,000 years ago when compared with the actual skeleton of a man buried over 57,000 years ago in our native country? So, yeah, thanks for bearing with me through that. That was, kind of a long one, but I hope you see why I chose that as my introductory article. Really important because, again, it just further goes along with establishing not only a much deeper epoch here in America, especially the American Southwest into the Gulf, but also showing, kind of the full circle again narrative that I was describing, that, although Egypt is full of mystery and many amazing things, the time frames and at least from a historical perspective, have been quite manipulated, and that's exactly what this author is saying, and it correlates with what people were saying when they were digging up mummies and all kinds of amazing Egyptian-styled artifacts and hieroglyphics and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, um, and I want to hop into river names. We're not going to read this entire article. I've covered this before, but I just feel it's an important thing to kind of um, reestablish, as we were just talking about um, the dating. We can also kind of relate the names and why that is important, because so much of what we discuss is about language and how language is an incredible um, kind of litmus test for not only time frames, although that could be a little wishy-washy. I like the geological stuff as presented here. Again, we're not trying to pinpoint things down to a specific year or decade. We're simply showing that um, what we've been told is so far. I mean, hundreds of, you know, so far from the real case here. And the Mississippi has been running its course, although it's changed quite drastically several times due to several different events. Has been running its general course for, I don't want to go 150,000 years, but for a very long time. Um, and um, the visual I wanted to present to you guys of, part of what I loved so much there too is just the lumbermen, the Louisiana or the Kentucky axemen. Imagine that, letter, you know, hey, we're gonna need like every every feller you can ship um down here because we got an issue, and they show up and they're just chopping and chopping and chopping, 100-foot trees going down. How many? This is just mind blowing to me. And as we get farther up the Mississippi, we're going to show as they were building some more advanced construction, they were breaking their ways into tombs. And yeah, it gets crazy. The farther up the Mississippi we go, it gets pretty remarkable. But yeah, so really quick, we're going to hop into our Indian River names, 1891. Curious identity with Old World nomenclature. The great majority of old Aboriginal names of America appear the prototype, if not the real, right? The origin. So the origin of river names possibly from America. I apologize for the low quality sometimes. When you're clipping these newspapers, it's just a crapshoot. Sometimes they're perfectly legible, other times they're quite horrible. I'm just going to go over what I've highlighted. Um, I'll um, I'll have a little link for most of these articles in the description if you want to go back and read them yourselves. Okay. The great majority of the old Aboriginal names of America have what appears to be the prototype, if not the real congener, sorry, existing in many of the ancient languages of the Old World, and even among the names of the recently discovered races of Central Africa, there are numerous analogies and identities with our native Indian appellations. In fact, the river names show so many analogies with the appellations of the Old World that they confirm the belief in the minds best informed on the subject that the American prehistoric man himself sprang from the Old World races. Now, remember what we just stated in that article and kind of the groundwork I've been laying through the entire series now, over 10 episodes, is that Um, not only are some of the oldest um, petroglyphs, hieroglyphics, and oldest representations of language that exist anywhere are here in the American Southwest, and I think they connect here. So, as he stated, he's kind of going over his own words here. He's saying that it seems likely that America was not only the prototype, but the real basis for all of the river names, right? And it is the belief in the minds of the best informed on the subject that prehistoric man himself sprang from the old world races. Yeah, this was the root or the foundation, perhaps, of the old world races. At least a jumping off point. And I don't. This isn't a dick measuring contest for time and who came first or anything at all like that. I'm just trying to show a different perspective, and it's not about first or last or anything like that. I'm just want to show that there is a ancient root here in the Americas, that is buried so far below our feet that it's either been purposely hidden, which obviously seems very likely at this point, um, or it's been buried so far that we have no idea of its existence, and that almost all the major cities from Alaska to where we are here in Mississippi lie on the shoulders of ancient cities and ancient races. Okay, he appears to be a mongrel, the result of a crossing of the white Europeans and the black Moorish races, for he is not the Mongolian of the East. So, very interesting because we have a lot of this here when you look into some of the early Aboriginal, quote, Aboriginal again, because they stand on the foundations of buried civilizations themselves. Um, But it's interesting, right? Because when you look at seafaring peoples and trading peoples, and the Mississippi was chock full of them in the 1600s, 1700s. They had Hebrew speaking people. The Phoenicians, Chaldeans. That sounds crazy, right? They came way before. They'd been, no, they, Egyptian. Um, what we know of how we see the world in the 1600s, let me tell you, was insanely different than what we're told. He appears to be a mongrel, like I said, a mixing of Europeans and black Moorish races, but he is not the Mongolian of the East. Now, you're going to find all of this here, and as we go through these mounds, you're going to see a lot of this. But that was a really important touch there, because you find that the Moors had a incredible correlation with the Huguenots. Again, how these groups of people were completely reclassified, and all these people are given 1,000 names, and it just becomes way too confusing. But the Moors had a root, I wouldn't say a stranglehold, but they had been trading in up the Mississippi for hundreds of years. Um, the establishment of New Granada in the American Southwest, and some of the relics and ancient cities that I had shown throughout the American Southwest have a deep um, correlation. And it gets even more interesting when you find the correlations between the Chinese, the Black Moors, and the Phoenicians, okay, and Vikings. Classifications of skin color and race, they didn't really exist like they do now. Important things to remember. The old American names tell the story of the prehistoric man's origins in terms of higher significance and truth than any other evidence now known to exist. I mean, what a statement that is, right? So I'm just gonna read that again. The old American names tell the story of the prehistoric man's origin in terms of higher significance and truth than any other evidence now known to exist. This is why language is so key. And, despite the nonsense that is the discovery of America by Columbus, when you kind of break that down for what it is, and you start looking at the correlations and obsessions with language and the kind of people that he was bringing with him and the people that were translating, it becomes very interesting. And we're going to talk more in the coming weeks. I'm going to get into the Etruscans a little more. We're going to kind of break down the Phoenician, Finnish, Etruscan correlations, and we're going to connect some dots in the Yucatan. And that's important because we're dealing with the Gulf. It's the same seafaring peoples that you're going to find in the Mississippi in this era are existing and trading with the Vikings and the Phoenicians and all of these things. And the language is a huge bridge to this, and that's exactly what this article is saying essentially, right? That the old American names um, are the most um, important evidence now known to exist. The old world peoples of antiquity built their river nomenclature from brief, I apologize for the quality, monosyllabic germs of the prehistoric speech. The great bulk of the nomenclature of the New World appears to have been constructed upon the models known to exist in the ancient civilization of the East. No, who it came before. He keeps stating this, but he's kind of tiptoeing around the fact he's saying, but the nomenclature is essentially started here, okay, and ventured the other direction. And out of the identical germ word employed by the prehistoric races of the older world, even the very words and names of the ancients are reproduced in the nomenclature of America in great frequency, whether purposefully or by chance. Well, it's definitely not by chance. As we've said many times, many words from the oldest languages known, Hebrew and Chinese, are found in our ancient Indian appellations. Now, this is exactly what I was saying. There are Morris, quote, Phoenician ships found in Oregon, Phoenician ships found below ground in caves in Colorado. Um, Not only were they called Moorish, right? Moorish slippers are oddly Phoenician, which have a lot of interesting correlations with Viking ships, and the language carved on the side of this quote Phoenician Moorish boat found in a cave below ground in Colorado was Chinese. And as we get more into the Yucatan and Mexico stuff, um, that's a bit on the back burner just because it's hard to I can't work that into Anomalous America, and I've got so many other things going. But we're going to find that some of the oldest pyramids in Mexico were covered in Chinese hieroglyphics. And why do I say hieroglyphics? Well, because the Chinese language we have today is not what the Chinese language was in the 1700s, 1600s. It was changed in the 1800s, and it just became this mashup. Okay, so many words from the oldest languages known, Hebrew and Chinese, are found in our ancient Indian appellations. Yuba is the Hebrew term for water. We have the rivers named Yuba in California, and in South America, a river and a lake that have the name written Yubul. France has the river Yubay, and Africa has the Yubai. The Russian Empire has the river Yubul or Ub. Yor or Yar is a word for river in Hebrew, and in Russia, also Yar, Yer, and Yor are the river names. I'll stop there just for the sake of time, but I hope you kind of get the correlation there. And I've talked so much about um, language in the past. This should be nothing new. But yeah, apologize. Oh, okay, let's take a little break and just kind of talk to chat. Oh, 13th monkey, Mike. Thanks for being here, guys. I know it's been a long break, and I'm just grateful that you're joining me here again. Um, yeah, appreciate all of you. Brian, good to see you. Joe, as always. Snake Jones, JJ Organics, good to see you. Mystery, good to see you, brother. Lenny Time, good to see you. Thanks for joining. Hopefully, we can get a time together. Um, let's see if we have anyone asking questions here. St. Louis, Mound City is on big graveyard. It has an underground city, massive cave network. Oh yeah, St. Louis. Yeah, once we get to Missouri, we're going to talk a lot about the underground. So Snake Jones, thanks for pointing that out. And I have some pretty amazing stuff from Missouri. Can't wait to get into it. Um, um, I have a crystal cave on my property. I can't get at the entrance and it collapsed. Yeah, crystal caves. Crystal caves and trees, they go hand in hand. They are one and the same. Giant trees and crystal cave networks. So many overlaps. You know, our giant crystal caves, part of ancient trees, seems very probable. All right, this is Rapid City, South Dakota, 1901. Actually, I want to, before I share this one, well, we'll just read this one. I had an article from 1830 about the first time anyone wrote any information about this Great Wall of Mississippi. And yeah, I'll get to it hopefully before we end the stream here. Um, but I've covered this before, but it's an important part of this segment, so we're going to cover it again here. And this is from 1901. Okay. Evidence of a high civilization among prehistoric Mississippians is found, may be the cradle of mankind. Now, that is, it's a grain of salt, but it shouldn't be. Don't overlook it. We've found authors saying that about almost every state here, and that's because the high antiquity of America is one of the largest um, buried truths when it comes to archaeology and geology here in America. But going backwards, just in case I forget or run out of time, the 1837 article where the first time I ever find anybody describing this great wall, it's not a wall, it's not even exposed. They call it a great pavement. They call it an ancient highway. Much love from McDermott, Oregon. Wonderful little place. Thanks for being here. Um, anyways, where was I? They called it a highway. They used it as a highway for their horses. And they called it an ancient pavement. Now, this is interesting because they said the same thing about certain places in Mexico, and then they found that they were absolutely titanic walls, unbelievably huge walls. And this wall is seems to be the very same thing. So this is a long one, so we're going to just jump right in so I don't waste any more time. Again, South Dakota, 1901. Great buried wall causes a big stir. As I stated already, may be the cradle of mankind. I mean, just, that's what a thing to say in the 1900s. But again, these articles go back into till the 1830s, folks. So they knew about this in the 1830s. And even in the 1830s, when they were describing it as a highway, before the Mississippi or the flooding of certain rivers had exposed more of this and showed it to be a wall, not a highway. They were saying, this is right angles. That's obviously made by man, but it's there's no way the Aboriginal cultures that have called this place home for hundreds of years could have had anything to do with this. Again, that's why starting off with the buried forests article is so important because what lies on top may be ancient, but boy, it's not even close to what's found below ground, and that's kind of been a big um, focus for the anomalous America is what's lied below ground. The crazy, amazing. Some of those buildings again. For those who are new and haven't seen all my work, the largest building ever found was found in the American Southwest, over 1,200 rooms, 6-mile long buildings, folks. You know what was going on here? Pretty crazy, and I think this wall is a big part of the big part of the puzzle. A chance discovery away down in the wilds of southwest Mississippi may give antiquarian. I'm going to zoom in for you guys. Sorry. We're starting right over here. May give antiquarians and archaeologists a new problem to solve, the answer to which may upset all preconceived notions and theories as to the Aboriginal, sorry, inhabitants of this country, or at least in the lower part of the Mississippi Valley, and throw a flood of light upon what are now dark pages as to human existence on this continent. Fantastic opening paragraph. It may be decided that this continent, and not the Far East, was the cradle of the human race, that before Nineveh and Tyre reared their walls against the opaline sky of the Orient, before Babylon and the pyramids were thought of, there existed upon this continent a civilization complete, highly cultivated in the mechanic arts, and capable of engineering work comparing favorably with that shown in the pyramids and in the manifold beautiful temples which lie buried beneath the shifting sands of the desert of the Sahara. Sig, thank you. New baseball for the kids. Yeah. Oh shit. Um, Football camp starts like in a week, so guess shit just keeps getting crazier. And yeah, me and my wife, on top of all of our own kids and some of the kids we watch from the neighborhood and church, I've started taking care of my 4-month-old niece. So life just keeps getting crazier here. So I appreciate that very much. At the present moment, an expedition is being fitted out, amply provided with funds and under the direction of his distinguished archaeologists and antiquarians, who will give the Brandywine Wall in lower Mississippi a thorough investigation in the light of science and experience in such matters. Now, I've talked about this before, but it's worth bringing up again because there's a lot of new ears here. But Brandywine Wall. Okay. Now, you've heard me make the Tolkien references and Middle Earth and how many amazing correlations there are between the Middle Earth map and the Americas. And, I've talked a lot about Tolkien and the Kalevala. And, this is important because guess who? The Etruscans, their mythos is almost identical. And we're going to show that their language is almost identical. And why this is important? Well, because the Etruscans had established roots far older in the Americas and in the Gulf than they did in the Mediterranean. And where did they come from first? Well, they came from a red land to the west. And I would say that it's absolutely this area. So worth an asterisk there. Brandywine Wall. It's even on Tolkien's map in a similar area if you look at it with the right eyes to where I would put the southern states along the Gulf. A thorough investigation in the light of science and experience in such matters. Now, again, remember I mentioned the first time they even wrote an article was 1837. So this is 60 more than 60 years, 65 almost after the fact they even knew this wall existed and they're putting together an expedition. Very interesting. This expedition is expected to reach Copaya in Claiborne counties sometime during the present month, and excavations will at once begin. The results of the work will be watched by students all over the world with intense interest. Stones ready cut. Some 20 years ago, a few of the inhabitants of the southeast corner of Claiborne County, Mississippi, needed some stones for building purposes. Okay, now this is a narrative that we've been covering as well, that they're just tearing these things down and using them for their own purposes. Now, I don't remember this article because I've read several on this wall, but there is an article, hopefully it's this one, I can't remember. There is an article where they say that even the government itself of Mississippi, hey, we're building a new Capitol building. Instead of quarrying these stones ourselves, we're just going to steal them all from this wall. And that's what they did. And that's what the locals were doing. Some of the people remembered. Oh, thank you so much for this $20 donation, man. Really appreciate it. Showing the Oregon love. Where was I? Some of the people remembered, so it is alleged, seeing some nice regular looking stones in the woods in a pile from which the accumulated loam of ages has been washed by the torrential rains of the seasons. And so, accordingly to the place the people repaired, they were charmed at the quality of the stone and pleased that it was so conveniently cut, ready for their use. They pried some of the blocks from the resting place, and then the quarry became famous. Think about this, you guys. It's a quarry now. I mean, can you imagine how often this happened? How often they found old constructions and it just became the quarry for the town. People for miles and miles around came to get some of the stones whenever their use demanded stone for any purpose. And so, in the course of time, a good deal of the stone was taken out. It was found that the quarry extended east and west, and that it was not long until, by going literally into it, they exhausted the blocks and had to follow the trend of the rocks. Tons of the nice sandstone was taken away. Some of it was in blocks hewn into squares, and some of the blocks were longer than others, but they were all trimmed nicely along the sides and at the ends with almost mathematical exactness. Then the discovery was made that a few miles from the quarry, a branch of Bayou Pierre had broken through the quarry. On the other side of the stream, a good idea of the quarry could be obtained. There was the same sandstone. It was cut in the same rectangular blocks, and the quarry seemed to be about 12 or 15 feet in width and the same in height, probably a little wider at the bottom than at the top. Above, the highest stones for several feet was a rich loam composed of dead leaves and the decaying vegetation of centuries. Along its top grew great live oaks, slow growing scrub oak, and long leaf pines large enough to furnish masts for the biggest vessel that ever breasted waters. Again, this giant wall has been buried so long that it's the largest trees to furnish the biggest mass of any vessel that ever breasted waters. Again, that's kind of why I started with that buried forest. It really puts it all in perspective. Like this is easy. This is an easy pill to swallow because we just discussed 10 levels of buried life and the flora and fauna getting crazier and larger and more ancient the deeper you go. It was noticed that there was a long ridge extending over the country, and that in various places where the dirt had been washed away, the blocks of the wall were shown. Hopefully, in this one, again, I've read so many, I fail to remember exactly, but hopefully in this one, they discussed that they went for miles and miles and never found the end of it. It disappeared into the mountainside. The wall escaped notice. All this began to become generally known in the course of time, for they are an easy going set down in the Mississippi and are not easily excited unless someone intimates the free silver is a heresy or the Brian is a politically dead. Not sure what that means. The bucolic inhabitants of that section may have wandered somewhat, but as the problem was manifestly unsolved, they worried not at all, but kept on making drafts on the deposit for building material. Holy smokes! I mean, just you had this wall on your property. You were now a quarry, and you were selling these pre-cut stones. Along about 1875-76, reports of the quarry or the Brandywine Wall, as it had become to be known in the community, owing to its proximity to Brandywine, a little country settlement and post office near where the first stone was taken out, got beyond the immediate neighborhood. The first person to take cognizance of them was a Miss Lou Jones, a resident of Halehurst, Copia County. She was a scholarly woman and, moreover, an enthusiastic amateur photographer. And she proposed to get up an expedition to go out in the Brandywine neighborhood and make excavations and take pictures of the curiosity. But for some reason, the expedition fell through. Oh, yeah. Go figure, huh? But again, remember what we stated. 1837 was the first time that I could find that there was an article written about this, and I will do my best to go back and read it. Okay, it was written. It was described as a prehistoric highway or prehistoric pavement. However, the talk of it stimulated local interest, and a few years later, more definite reports were obtained. Outcroppings of the wall were reported from various localities, erosion here and excavation there, the work being done either by the forces of nature or by man. But in every instance, it was discovered that the stone was practically the same as the Brandywine, cut in the same manner and put together in the same way. And again, to jump backwards a little bit, if you haven't seen my Anomalous America Texas episode, we cover the Great Rock Walls of Texas. There's more than one. There's several, and they're incredibly advanced. The cement is beyond anything they knew of in that time frame, and the materials and the minerals found. They found titanium. They found all kinds of exotic metals in this wall. And I've stipulated that this was Atlantean type technology, that this wall was probably electrified, if I had to guess. And that's how I feel about it. And that there was something more advanced to this wall. Did it glow? Was it phosphorescent? I don't know. But the metallurgy alone shows you that we're dealing with some incredibly advanced group. And I think this wall is very much of the same type of construction. And these walls exist all over America. They are monumental. It's almost like the entire length and breadth of America was covered in huge Titanic type walls. And later on in this, they're going to call this wall a continuation of the Great Wall of China. I think we're dealing with the same people. It's 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 just too advanced. I've lost my place. Erosion here and there. Okay. It was then discovered that the wall could be traced for several miles by the mound of earth which covered it. In some places, it was almost level with the ground. In other places, it towered a number of feet above the level of the surrounding country. And far at various far as report. Okay, lots of spelling errors sometimes and grammatically weird. Reports of it are available. The stones were exposed, showing almost conclusively that it was a continuation of the same work. Very important. The exact beginning or ending of the wall has not to this day been ascertained. So here we are, we're 60 plus years from the first time it's been identified, and they're not even close to knowing where it starts and where it ends. Longo, thanks for being here. Good to see you, brother. Um, the Great Wall of China was a road. Yeah, it served many purposes. I agree. Just like this was called a great highway road, um, dividing lands, safety from great monsters and beasts. Who knows? But I think it's multi-purposed. Me and 13th Monkey have gone as far as to say that they also were transporting gas. It seems likely to me that they were doing more than just running horses and carriages over the tops of these things and trading potatoes and carrots. It seems very likely that we're dealing with oil and gas. That's my. Why would these advanced civilizations put the kind of effort into building walls like this if it wasn't for these kind of Atlantean trade empires that I believe existed. And I think this has a lot to do with it. And also, you have to understand that I think we're dealing with the same time frame as these giant reptiles and giant mammals as well that were warring with man. So I think it's multifaceted. But yes, great comment. It certainly was a road, but I think it was many other things as well. I lost my place. Okay, so again, showing conclusively that they don't even know where the wall begins or ends. After the agitation by Miss Jones in favor of an expedition to examine the wall at length, Captain T.B. Birdsong of Hazelhurst became interested in it. About that time, Colonel Lewis J. Dupree moved to Hazelhurst and began the publication of a paper there. In company with Captain Birdsong, they agreed to make an examination of the place. Speaking of the trip, with a Mr. Bridges who lives at Brandywine and an SS Stanres who resides in the neighborhood, we visited the wall, locally known as the quarry. Again, quarry. I cannot give a description of it better than these sketches, which I have prepared, and which you have, nor a better verbal description of it than you have, except to say that on the top it appears broad enough. How funny is it that you made that comment about it being a road? Listen to this part. I have prepared to which nor better verbal description of it than you have, except to say that on top it appears broad enough for a 2-horse wagon to be driven on it, and with plenty of room to spare. So it's like a 2-lane highway. Jose Rodriguez, thanks again for the donation, brother. Good to see you. So yeah, and they called it a highway before they even found areas of it that had been washed away, where they identified it as wall. They called it an ancient pavement. And this correlates with the highways of Mexico, where they found thousands of miles of pavement. They called them ancient highways, and they eventually were like, "Holy shit, this is a giant wall. It goes 80 feet down." So it was multiple things. Wall plainly visible. Mr. Bridges got a crowbar and showed how the people of that section got the stone out of the wall. He stood on top of the wall with the crowbar and then pounded the wall with repeated vertical strokes until the crowbar bit into a crack or a seam. Then, working the bar literally out, rolled a stone several feet square, almost a perfect cube, from its ancient bed of cement, falling from our feet as though fresh from the stonecutter's hands. From the spot from which the stone was moved could be seen the cement which held it in place, and the ends of the other stones and their sides, cut and adjusted with mathematical nicety, were plainly visible and were examined by us closely. High above us, 200 or 300 feet, rose a hill with an oval shape, much like the dome of the Capitol at Washington, and the marvelous part remains to be told. The wall apparently runs under the hill, for it is exposed on the other side. Again, what's in the hill, you guys? It's a building. This goes back to what we were talking about, the ancient mounds in Colorado. Oh, these giant mounds of sand, and then they get inside of them and they find 100-room buildings. This wall continues into this mountain because the mountain is clearly a structure. I'm going to read that one again. High above us, 200 or 300 feet, rose a hill with an oval shape, much like the dome of the Capitol at Washington, and the marvelous part remains to be told. The wall apparently runs under the hill, for it is exposed on the other side. It can be plainly seen, and its continuation is too plain to be doubted or questioned. I distinctly remember Colonel Dupree remarking, "If that hill be the sediment of ages, how old must be this ruin?" Amazing. And I further remember him saying that to his mind there existed under the hill more extensive works than were visible from the outside. Basically, exactly what we just said there, right? 13th monkey, what's he saying? What am I missing here? The deserts in China filled with evidence of similar stuff to what Ben is describing here. Yeah, it's worldwide. It's worldwide. Definitely got to get Mike back on here because we just got to we just ran out of time and there's just so much to show, and you can see these constructions are worldwide. This realm was built by the hands of um, a similar eye, and yeah, these walls are multi-purposed for sure. They're not just roads, they're not just walls. I think they're transport systems for sure, for goods and commerce, absolutely. Horse and people, sure. But I think we're dealing with, um, you know, mining adjacent, natural gas, oil adjacent. The advancedness of these ancient sea peoples, Atlantean types, was far more advanced than we think, and far closer to our timeline as well. To uncover enough of this vast stone pile and delve into the secrets under that hill sufficiently to give an intelligent idea of what it contains, whether it be another pyramid or not, whether it be another pyramid, would take a small army of men with picks and barrows some time. We came away from the place dazed and wondering. The work was evidently artificial. Okay. So again, why it's so fantastic to read these articles again, because I don't remember this part even. So basically, what I was postulating above was that the wall ran under this giant hill that was 300 feet tall. Well, it's a giant building, and that's exactly what they're saying. Is it a pyramid? Well, no, they said it was dome shaped like the Washington Capitol, but obviously they're going as far as to say, is it another pyramid? Oh, how many have they found? We came away from the place dazed and wondering. Can you imagine just that these guys just scratching their heads? Holy shit, what do we find here? I received a letter from John D. Jewett, who resides at Newton, Ohio, in regard to the wall, and who got all the information I had about it. He prepared a statement about the wall and submitted it to Professor F. W. Putnam, curator of the Peabody Museum, and to Dr. J. F. Snyder, editor of the American Archaeologist, and to Dr. D. G. Brinton, professor of archaeology at the University of Pennsylvania, the latter being probably the most noted authority in America upon archaeology. Might be a natural ledge. Yeah, I don't think so. Dr. Brinton wrote that he thought the wall might be a natural stone ledge with regular stratifications. Thus, such a wall is round and east. See, this is silly. Once we get to Tennessee, we're going to show that this wall that he's talking about is man-made as well. Quoted as the work of Aborigines, and supposed cement is the decaying surfaces of the layers in juxtaposition. Yeah, no, it's not cement, and these aren't stones made by man. Okay. Dr. Snyder expressed great amazement about the wall and said that it seemed incredible that such a great curiosity should remain unknown. He was inclined to be dubious of it as the handiwork of man, and said it is scarcely within the range of possibility that any of the Mayan stock should have migrated to that latitude and left no other record of their presence than this wall. Well, they're there. Okay. We just talked about, buried pyramids or buried buildings, and what lies beneath. You go down 20, 30, 40 feet. They don't find the end of this wall, they don't find the base of this wall. And we're going to talk more and more as we go up the Mississippi about buried ancient structures and who really were the foundations here. Now, if you remember from my Anomalous America Texas video, we talk about some of the really incredibly advanced stuff they were finding. Insane armor, um, translucent clear obsidian axes. I mean, very, very advanced. Like, what's that recent Black Panther movie where it's like the Aztecs are fighting his people? You can kind of see what I think we were talking about. We were dealing with very advanced metallurgy and advanced technology for sure. The dogs are barking. Um, All right, got about that's like my 30-minute marker. Okay, where was I? So we're gonna power through here. We know the prehistoric people in the Mississippi Valley had progressed so far. Okay, so the Mayan, he was saying that they doubt the Mayan stock. We showed through all of the anomalous America stuff. The American Southwest was peopled by incredibly advanced races. Flower Jones, thank you so much. Appreciate that very much. So yeah, this man just doesn't have all the information at his fingertips that we do today. Dr. Jewett, who is thoroughly posted upon archaeology, wrote, "The strong probability, I think, that the location of the Copia County wall itself is referred to in several Mexican legends as the remote pre-Mexican time. If the intelligent and cultured American public can be convinced there is work in Mississippi older than the pyramids of Cholula, and that a glimpse of its history and of the strange people who built it is revealed in the records of the great nation who used and built this wall, and its attendant works. The public will make haste to rescue it from the clutches of your enterprising house builders. Yeah. Yep. Oh, the city's just the quarry. He's talking about the people that call this the quarry and have been stealing from it. The conditions for miles around preclude any chance of the wall being a natural ledge. Exactly. The nearest sandstone is in the upper part of the Hinds County, nearly 50 miles away, and it is of a totally different character from the stone in the wall under discussion and has no regular stratification. The wall is located upon a high plateau which ends on the Mississippi River with a long line of steep hills as shown in the map, and the soil is a loam free from rock, but plentiful, besprinkled with gravel, and is peculiarly susceptible to erosion by the elements, and is gradually being reduced thereby to a perfect flat level. Colonel Dupree died several years ago, and his copious notes, which he is known to have made in regard to the wall, cannot be found. Go figure. Captain Birdsong is one of the leading citizens of Hazelhurst and Copiah County, and his statements are verified by many intelligent people who have seen parts of the wall at various places related to Mexican works. If in Central America and southern Mexico there existed a civilization capable of building magnificent palaces and temples, which have recently been discovered there, and which were treated of at length by the Century magazine, illustrated from photographs in several issues of the magazine during the years 1898, 1899, and if there was a powerful nation there capable of such work, it was not a long journey across the water to the highlands of the Mississippi. The lower parts of the Mississippi and Louisiana are evidently of more recent origin, being deposits by the sediment from the Mississippi River and the Gulf, aided by the erosion of the higher lands above, upon part of which stands the work under discussion. The Mayan civilization of Central America antedates that of the Aztecs by hundreds of years. So the more recent discoveries show, and in addition, legends, inscriptions, and picture writings show the Mayans of Central America to have been a maritime race. Right. Part of the Atlantean race, as we were saying. It requires no stretch of the imagination to suppose that a tribe or a part of a tribe immigrated to the North American continent to set up a government of their own, and that in pursuance of that purpose, they built a wall about their city, and in a strange land, perhaps built the wall first. Now, this is fantastic because these are people from this is the early 1900s, late 1800s, and they're basically saying that this is a part of a city, and I agree completely. Governor Longino of Mississippi has become so interested in the subject that he has individually set to work and collected a fund of several $100s to be expanded in making excavations along the wall and in the hill referred to. In addition, a private expedition consisting of R.W. McGottry, warden of the United States Penitentiary at Leavenworth, Kansas, and several scientists is expected during the present month, as is an expedition under the auspices of the University of Chicago, with the projectors of which Governor Longino and has been corresponding, and which is also expected sometime during the present month. It is probable that the governor will turn over his fund to the university expedition, and it may be expanded intelligently in research and the character of the wall and the works definitely determined by men of knowledge and experience in matter of archaeology. That was very long-winded. Thank you so much for sticking with me. Really important. Really important. Holy smokes. Apologize. Team stretch. Okay, let's go find that article about the ancient cement. Appreciate you guys very much. Thanks for sticking with me. Those long-winded ones can be tough. I realize that. Okay. And this is in a different region. Okay, this is 1837. 1837, okay? Antiquities of Mississippi. The pavement or platform of stone described in the Bascon's Register in Rankin County has recently been partially examined. It is in Range 4 East, Township 3, Section 1. The land is now owned and occupied by Mr. Daniel Lowry. The stones are of various sizes, and we are inclined to believe not quite so regular as stated by Besencon. One particularly examined was 4 feet by 5 and 10 inches thick. Others are longer and not more than 2.5 inches wide and 4 inches thick. The edges are straight lines, and the corners right angles, and the thickness from 3 to 10 inches, but generally about 5 inches. The upper side is smooth and even, but not polished. The underside is rough and irregular. The pavement is accurately horizontal and extends indefinitely under a hill. Sounds. Remember this article is from a different county, so this is the same wall but in a different county. Okay, and here they're saying the same thing. It extends indefinitely under a hill. Those who see the stumps and trees that stand above it cannot doubt its antiquity. And when we examine the corners and joints of the stones and consider other circumstances, we must pronounce it artificial. From what I heard recently, I am inclined to think there is another pavement of the same kind in the bank of Campbell's Creek about half a mile above its entrance into Strong River, and not far from the same place near the road leading from Brandon to Mill Haven. There is a receding, can't see what it says at the bottom there. Pull out the next part of this. Apologize for the transition, a little sloppy. From Bell's Creek, where are found some hewn stones of different shapes and sizes. This is but a few miles from Judge James, who is acquainted with the location. About 4 miles below Monticello, there is a very large mound and a number of smaller ones, and a canal extending entirely across Pearl River Swamp. This, evidently, was used as a defense and not for navigation, as there are several places where the canal is intermitted, as if for passways across it. These might have been fortified by gates. So we're dealing with a giant stone city with canals. Okay. This is another part of this wall. So this is a huge wall. I would say there's certainty that it probably extends the entire length of the Mississippi. And like I had stated, other writers were calling it a continuation of the Great Wall of China. So paths have been fortified by gates or otherwise. In the bottom of this canal, which is 15 feet deep, there are seen growing the largest kinds of trees, witness of at least 2 centuries. So this is what I was mentioning earlier when I was discussing the canals in Florida. And here we are in Mississippi, the same thing. Here we're dealing with giant walls, fortified gates, stone cities, ancient canals, so ancient that giant trees, the largest kinds of trees, growing for at least 2 centuries. Along Steens Creek and also on Richland and Tumbula Creeks in Rankin, the smaller kind of round top mounds are common. There are also a number near the Richmond in the same county. These mounds are uniformly found on low flats of rich soil. None of them have been opened. 1837, that article was, okay? Crazy. Um, Again, I want to say thank you. Most importantly, I wouldn't be doing this without you guys tuning in. And I know that, this is a crazy hour to ask anyone to tune into me. So I'm grateful that you're here, each and every one of you. It means a lot. Um, we're going to, with the limited time we have left, we're going to talk about some of the ancient canal systems, how they relate to the mound builders. I think the mound builders came after, obviously, as that article pretty much stated the same thing. They're describing this as a highway, that it connects with canals, ancient gates, stone cities, goes under huge hills, just as the previous article stated. Hopefully we can get through all of this. No, there's no way. Okay, so let's pick and choose here. Okay, we were going to talk about DeSoto's coffin. All this was buried when DeSoto came here, so that gives you an idea of the dates. We definitely have to talk about the bayous and the canal systems. Okay, I think that's the most adjacent to what we're discussing here. So from here, we're going to talk about, are Mississippi bayous the work of prehistoric people? I'm going to step out for a minute. Zoom in. December 1912. Again, on my it looks better on your screen on the stream than it does on my screen. Okay, that's about as far as we're going to want to go. Are Mississippi bayous the work of prehistoric people? Eminent engineer, after long study, declares they were artificial waterways for early Americans. Now, this is really interesting too, because we've correlated a lot of that already in these previous articles. Isola, Mississippi, December 14th. Are the bayous of the Mississippi Delta of natural origin? Nobody seems ever to have imagined otherwise. But now, an eminent civil engineer, Major Lamero Fontaine, PhD, who has spent 40 odd years in that region, like I was stating earlier, where these, the era of independent dedication like this just doesn't exist. I mean, it does, but it's few and far between. And the universities just have such a stranglehold on things today. 40 odd years in that region comes forward and declares that they are artificial waterways dug in very ancient times by a long vanished race of people. Very much related to this wall and these highways again, right? Same people. In the Yazoo, Mississippi country. Now, this Yazoo, okay? Remember the Mississippi River names. That's an important one to remember. In the Yazoo, Mississippi country, the like of which, topographically speaking, is not to be found anywhere else in the world, he has traversed thousands of miles of bayous and has carefully mapped them. He says that all of them, taken together, form a comprehensive system. They are, in fact, canals, meeting each other usually at right angles. Why were these canals dug? Major Fontaine answers that they were excavated for drainage purposes by clever engineers who understood the control of water currents. By this means, in very ancient times, the entire delta was made available for cultivation. Thus, for historic, one should rather say prehistoric reasons, it is most appropriate that the Mississippi of today should be called the Bayou State and her citizens mud turtles. At first glance, it seems difficult to realize how so gigantic a task could have been undertaken successfully by a primitive race of people. But to this objection, the major replies that the same remark might be equally applied to many other works of remote antiquity in South America and elsewhere. Like the pyramids of Egypt, the bayous were dug by immense numbers of slaves under the direction of intelligent taskmasters. Maybe, maybe not. When correctly mapped, the whole delta assumes the aspect of a checkerboard of waterways, unmistakably artificial. Ah, it's amazing. Built as refuge places. The principal object of building these mounds was probably to establish refuges during periods of flood. Now, this is absolutely the case. Um, many of um, I've already made a video on this before, but I've gone as far as to say that the pyramids of Giza were built by Noah and were designed as vaults or doorways to survive the deluge, the worldwide deluge, and that the pyramid, almost to its extreme top, was coated in the 1800s was coated in thick salt. It's been all but removed, and shows clearly that about three-quarters of the Great Pyramid of Giza lied below salt water for 1,000 years, maybe more, maybe less. And I'd say that these are of a similar. And I remember, as they stated, that gentleman was saying, "Is this another? Did we find another pyramid?" Holy smokes! They were all bewildered. They were just dumbfounded. We don't even have enough men to begin this undertaking, right? Now, this guy's been doing this for 40 years and mapped this and basically said this whole bayou is a giant checkerboard grid. Where was I? The major has gone so far as to reconstruct this vanished civilization to some extent. He has even built a small village of primitive house, conical in shape and composed of poles and tree bark, such as he supposed the ancients to have occupied. To make the thing complete, he has hired it's an entire okay, so he's having these people dress up. I apologize, I can barely read this part. breechcloths, petticoats, and thus distinguished. Okay, so he's just like created a city and has them living as they would have. Early works washed away. I gotta zoom out. These mound builders of old in the Delta could erect no permanent structures such as those which have survived the wear and tear of thousands of years in Mexico and Peru, because in the alluvial region there was no obtainable stone. Hence, it is, according to Major Fontaine, that all of their works have passed away. Now, I think you're dealing with a civilization that moved into these because, as we stated with the rock wall, and why that's an important piece to the puzzle, and why they were mentioning other buildings that were buried underground, pyramids, etc. They also stated that sandstone was but 50 miles away. So we're dealing with an advanced type of cement, right? Um, and they're making this on there on they're not quarrying this and bringing the stone in. I think that perhaps these straw huts are people that came onto these ruins, and that these canals, as stated in the first two previous articles, are far more ancient than the mound builders who have now come and lived on top of this. Because we're talking about successive ages, and this ancient stone wall is completely buried and doesn't exist except in some places where they call it an ancient highway. Because they look up, blah blah blah, and that their works have passed away, with the exception of the checkerboard of the bayous, a few of their mounds. They made excellent pottery. In fact, as far back as 1879, the people of a Mississippi town discovered this pottery had a commercial value and proceeded to dig it up in quantities from mounds in the neighborhood. A regular mining fever for aboriginal bric-a-brac broke out, and a considerable amount of money was earned. The prehistoric jugs, dishes, etc., being sold to enterprising merchants who disposed of it to museums and to collectors. The problem of the mound builders, long supposed to be an ancient and vanished race, has occupied for some years past a good deal of the attention of the Government Bureau of Ethnology. Now, we're going to show that this is not the case at all. That the government was turning a blind eye to the Carnegies and to certain universities and to the Smithsonian. The government knew all about this. They just were told to stay out of it because it was going to private hands and private collectors. And if the government got involved, well, then there's a bunch of red tape. So when they say stuff like this, that's a big nod that you know what's going on here. That there's enough money in people's pockets that the government's just turning a blind eye and pretending like they don't care, which is ridiculous. Okay, the problem, tension. Yep, its experts have dug into more than 2,000 mounds in various parts of the country and have come across some very surprising things. Thus, for example, in a number of such tumuli in the Middle West were discovered curious ornaments of sheet copper exhibiting an artistic knowledge far beyond that of any modern Indians. The latter, ignorant of their significance, call them thunderbirds. They seem to be ceremonial ornaments, some of them representing men wearing helmets and carrying scepters in their hands. The mound builders. There is hardly any part of the country where prehistoric mounds are not to be found, although, of course, a great many of them have been obliterated by agriculture. They number in the aggregate hundreds of thousands and occur all the way from the Atlantic to the Pacific and from the Mexican line to the Canadian border. And they go all the way to Alaska, as we've shown. By far, the most remarkable, however, are the so called effigy mounds, which are made to represent various animals. Okay, so this is kind of getting off the point here, but I'm going to finish it up. Effigy mounds. In Wisconsin, there is an extraordinary group designed to great extent in imitation of lizards and birds. There are hundreds of them on bluffs overlooking the Mississippi and hundreds more across the river in Iowa. It is obvious that they have an emblematic significance, and the supposition is that the animals concerned were the totems or heraldic devices of various clans, thus of a bear, the mounds of the snake, of a beast, the mounds of a snake. I apologize. I don't know. It's hard to read there. bear. I think it says the same thing. Thus, of a bear, the mounds of a snake of a bear, the mounds of a snake clan took the form of a serpent. Okay. I guess what they're saying is that the mounds shaped animals designated the clan that lived in that area. Very likely, these tumuli served anciently as sites for council houses. The whole valley of Prairie du Chien Township is dotted with deer, bears, antlered elks, etc., in droves, all herding like the river to the southwest. Some of the birds have a spread of 250 feet from wingtip to wingtip. Certain mounds, long supposed to represent men, are probably swallow-tailed birds. Effigy mounds, the oldest. The Bureau of Ethnology believes that the effigies are the oldest of all the mounds, which idea in itself is enough to render them highly interesting. Doubtless, many of them date back tens of thousands of years, if they are not much more ancient. A remarkable feature of them is the imitative curving and rounding of the bodies of the animals. It is evident that they could have been built in such numbers and of so great a size only by a secondary population, and that they must have been the work of many centuries. In a group of mounds near Chillicothe, Ohio, were found hundreds of skeletons wearing copper masks. These doubtless had some ceremonial significance. We'll get into some of those too as we get farther into this series. Together with the skeletons were discovered immense quantities of pearls. We're also going to get to that really important connection here with the Gulf and Florida and the pearl and the Atlantean connection. There were dozens of pearls nearly as big as English walnuts and fit for crown jewels. Again, giant pearls, giant flora fauna, giant oysters, right? Clams. I can't remember which one. That is to say, they must have once been suitable for royal regalia, and all of them had been rendered worthless by decay, evident to long burial. The most remarkable resemblance of the prehistoric mounds in the United States, both for number and size, is the famous Kokia group opposite St. Louis in Illinois. Many such tumuli contain thousands of skulls, showing that they were used for burial purposes. In an Iowa mound was found the skeleton of a giant who must have been 6 inches over 7 feet in height. Around his neck was a collar of bear's teeth. We're going to cover this exact mound and others wearing the bear teeth necklaces. A skull from a mound in Alabama was entirely filled with small snail shells. The puzzle is to imagine why. In another mound, the government experts came across a large central chamber in which were 11 skeletons arranged in a circle with their backs against the walls, while in their midst was a great seashell which had been converted into a drinking cup. A farmer in Bollinger County, Missouri, while plowing over a mound, struck a stone coffin containing a skeleton in a gourd-shaped vessel filled with lead ore, so pure that he turned it into bullets. It was not uncommon for the builders of such tumuli to enter their dead in coffins of the kind. Can't read that, sorry. That is to say, walled with slabs of stone. Some of the mounds hold caches filled with corn, evidently many centuries old. In one near Tohole was dug up a hollow metal bird with many perforations. Its use is a mystery, but probably it had some magical significance and belonged to a prehistoric medicine man. The famous Hope Mound in Florida yielded copper breastplates set with pearls, and in other mounds in the same state, the excavators came across copper snakes of highly artistic workmanship. Vanished race a myth. Now, whatever may be the truth in regard to the early inhabitants of the Mississippi Delta and the origin of the bayous, it is not believed by the Bureau of Ethnology that the mounds so plentifully scattered over other parts of the United States were built by a lost race antedating the Indians. Undoubtedly, most of them are prehistoric, dating back to, that is to say, a period before Columbus. But it is thought that the ancestors of the Indians themselves were responsible for them. In other words, if the idea be accepted, the vanished race of mound builders is a myth pure and simple. In 10% of the mounds dug by the government experts were found articles of white man's manufacturers such as brass knuckles, brass kettles, sorry, steel knives, etc., showing that they were constructed after the white man came. Early explorers found in Indians living on top of such mounds, burying their dead in them, and holding religious ceremonies on them. In fact, the building of mounds by the Indians is still going on. The late Major J.W. Powell himself saw two mounds in process of construction, one by the Paiutes in Santa Clara County, Utah, and the other in Pitt River Valley, California. Both of these were intended to serve as ceremonies, evidently work of Indians. Objects found in the mounds, other than those of white man's make, are nearly all exactly like manufactured by modern Indians. Major Powell made a careful study of a number of copper articles known as thunderbirds using a magnifying glass. And decided they had been turned out by machinery. Wow, that's interesting. I.e., struck with dies, which means, of course, that they were made by the whites for the Indians. Now, this narrative I absolutely don't agree with, and everything that I've been showing shows that this is completely ridiculous. Now, these mounds are on top. That's the part to take away from this. I'm not going to take sides or say anything about color because that's completely irrelevant. The mounds are on the surface, and the majority of what I'm talking about is to show that I want to go down as many layers as I can and see what's down there. Now we're going to cover a ton of mounds. We're going to show a lot of amazing stuff they find in the mounds, but who and where? I mean, you're going to find Mongolian phenotypes. You're going to find Scythian relics. You're going to find Chinese. You're going to find all kinds of stuff on the surface level. It's very interesting. Again, we're dealing with a seafaring, mercantile people. And it's proven that the Vikings and the Phoenicians and Norwegians, Scandinavians were coming up the Mississippi in, the 1100s, 3, 4, 500 years before Columbus. So, and who are the Vikings and the Phoenician, blah, blah, blah. So again, the white man and all these references that start to take stranglehold of the conversations here are just completely silly, fallacy, and just remove them from your mind. They have no bearing here. Race means nothing. We're just looking for the roots and foundations and what lies beneath all of this. So again, this kind of got off subject. This was about the bayous. The gentleman here, I don't want to forget his name, Major Lamaro Fontaine. Okay, 40 years he spent mapping these bayous and showed that they are completely man-made at an extreme expenditure of energy. And like I've stated with advanced canal works, like we covered in Arizona, in Utah, in New Mexico, that could have fed millions, if not billions, of people. And I would say that this region, you're dealing with the same thing. And this stone wall and stone cities and these gates and the canals only strengthen that far below ground level are the remnants of a city or cities of a race or races of people that come long before any of these mound builders and were far, far, far more advanced than we're told. Let's just see if there's anything worth finishing up here. So thorough has been the study of the interesting subject that gives the government experts are even able to guess with a reasonable assurance of accuracy what tribes of Indians were anciently responsible for the building of many of the groups of mounds. They say that the mounds in the valley of Delaware and in Ohio were constructed probably. Yeah, so it's just getting speculative. So not going to really finish off that article. Again, the majority of what I wanted to touch on was Fontaine's work, and unfortunately, this author kind of gets off subject. But the bayous, man-made, completely man-made. This resonates a lot with what we were talking about earlier with Louisiana in the Louisiana episode, showing how the majority of the southern part of Louisiana and the peninsula that sticks out into the Gulf of Mexico is completely terraformed, completely manipulated by the hands of man, and has been very anciently. So let's move on. We're going to do this one talks about the canal systems and a little bit of the 1811 situation. So we'll definitely want to do this one here. Thank you everyone for sticking with me. These have been a little more long-winded than usual, a little bit longer articles than usual. I try to stick to maybe just 2 or 3 paragraph articles, but but it's a blessing. It's a good problem to have. Good, thorough, in depth, long articles. Um, Again, making more of the correlations that I've been showing all the way through Alaska now. Very civilizations, very advanced construction, advanced people. What the government and the people in the town were doing with the said building materials. You can only imagine, right? Again, um, the wall, the highway, the bayous, the entire surface level of this realm has been shaped and manipulated by hands of man. And as I've stated before, it seems very likely that there wasn't a region of this realm that wasn't populated. You know, hundreds of billions of people covered this realm, I would say. So 707. Okay, this will be the last article I cover. Um, just to give you an idea of what we didn't get to talk about today, and I might make another video on it. Um, we were going to talk about DeSoto's coffin. That's an interesting one. I think I'll do a short little video on that later. I was going to talk about the underground cave systems and river streams that flow under the Mississippi, and that they can't account for all of the water runoff, and that the Mississippi should be far deeper, far larger, and flow far more water. And the only way that they could substantiate this is there must be a river equal in size that runs underground. And this just kind of extenuates what I've been saying about these amazing um, underground realms. And again, we'll find some underground cities as we get farther up the Mississippi. This article is from the 1860s, and it's called Mound Builders. And we're going to kind of hop around a little bit because there's just some specific stuff we want to talk about. The bayous and the canals. The ancient canals of the Mississippi Valley, their utility. A correspondent of the Austin, Texas Stylus gives the following account of some of the antiquities of the Mississippi Valley. Humboldt tells that in a forgotten age, by a forgotten race, a canal was dug across the Isthmus of the Darien, and unmistakable traces of its whole length bridging with water the narrow neck of the land that separates the two oceans. And yet, how we have boasted of modern progress and modern daring and modern genius for tasks which modern vanity has produced superhuman. The proposition supposed not long ago to be wholly new, to construct canals connecting rivers of this magnificent valley with one another, and with the Great Lakes and Mexican Gulf, was particularly affected by a race of men older than Cyrus or Solomon or Sostres. So yeah, basically they're saying the people that laid the constructions here in the Mississippi Valley come before a race of men older than Cyrus or Solomon. Just below Cape Girardeau, Missouri, there is a deep fosse more than 100 feet wide. It extended in an unknown period in the world's history westwardly to the waters of White and St. Francis rivers. Its obvious purpose was the diversion of a large volume of sup, superabundant water of the Mississippi into smaller tributary streams. At intervals of 20 or 30 miles, other canals still plainly defined, parallel with the first, and in many places filled with water and designed to lessen the flood tide of the mighty river, render floods harmless, and irrigate rich alluvial fields, traverse the lowlands. The earthquake of 1811 and 1812 moved across the country from east to west and upheaved the country's surface, as does a tempest the ocean's billows. After the convulsion, the lowlands of the Mississippi west of Cairo and New Madrid were broken in ridges as if the waves of the sea, in the midst of a violent storm, had been suddenly frozen. So remember earlier in this video, I was actually mentioning this exact quote without realizing I was going to get into it, but um, you know, describing how violent the earthquake was in this region, that the whole land was moving like an ocean, and that eventually, when the shaking stopped, it froze, and you had these huge crests and waves. By the convulsion of nature, these canals were broken, and for the first time since the days of David and Solomon, when they were dug, became useless. I mean, this can't be that this author just says that so nonchalantly, but these canals are older than David or Solomon. I have traced these ancient canals many miles. Probably they were not designed to render calamities such as now desolate rich plantations from Cairo to the sea impossible, but the eternal commerce of wide districts and of dense and mighty populations. Exactly as we were stating, you guys, these same bayous, checkerboard bayous, these massive stone walls, these massive stone highways, cities, gates, huge populations, just like the American Southwest, just like Arizona. Remember, we were talking, and if you haven't seen any of those episodes, you got to watch them. But stone cities, canals that go for hundreds of miles, and we're feeding millions, if not billions, of people. For long distances, towing paths a little above the bank of these canals may be plainly discerned, and not far from Ocella, Arkansas, brick abutments of a bridge that spanned a canal have been unearthed. In many places, there are agudas or artificial lakes paved with adobe. And along these canals and everywhere along the Mississippi, there are countless earthen nilometers like those of stone at the base of the pyramids of earth. Oh my gosh. And along the banks of the Euphrates, designed to mark each year the highest of successive floods. Oh, there's a lot to unpack in that. Um, Saying that the artificial lakes were lined with adobe, this takes us to remember the oldest and some of the most advanced terracotta ever found on the American continent were found in the canal works of Arizona. And those canals are still used today. So ancient, but so well constructed that they still are holding water today. Artificial lakes were constructed, perhaps as fish ponds, or designed to subserve purposes of reservoirs dug by Egyptian monarchs. From these and from canals opened by Egypt's wisest masters, farms during the hot summer months were irrigated. Herodotus tells us, and Napoleon the Great, in his conversations at St. Helena, repeated the assertion that after these canals were dug, the failure of crops in Egypt was rendered wholly impossible. Again, I started off this video making the Egyptian references, and as we continue through this series, they're going to never end. And as many of these authors have already stated, we have to rewrite history and stop saying that Egypt is the old world, that perhaps Egypt is a copy of America. There was hardly need for guano when floodgates of countless canals might be opened and broad plantations submerged and converted with loam, and indispensable to successive cotton culture in this valley as rotations of crops on the rugged hillsides of Georgia or Connecticut. My family had a farm in northern Georgia for almost 200 years. One of my favorite places in the world. Each planter of today in the lowlands would gladly lose one crop in seven that a layer of alluvium left by an overflow may enrich his fields. How wise were they who, in a forgotten age, not only created for themselves by means of these canals the cheapest possible agencies for transportation, but renewed each year the soil that gave such wonderful harvests and supported such dense populations. Now, you'll find the ceremonies for the flooding of the Mississippi and the flooding of the Nile are just insanely identical. And here we are finding not only language connections, but also construction. 25 miles below Memphis, flatboats leave the river, enter Blackfish Lake, and then the St. Francis River and its mouth. 60 miles further south, re enter the Mississippi. Grant was not the first seaman or warrior to send armies through the Yazoo Pass. There's that river name again. Along this mighty canal, there are mounds everywhere. Confederate soldiers in 1863-64 occupied them to resist the incursion of Northern armies. General Grant was perhaps impelled by the military necessity to cut the dike that closed this outlet, as were mound builders in the bygone ages to construct the canal. Bayous within the country, described by the Mississippi on the west and the Yazoo Pass and the Yazoo River on the east, are beyond computation and comprehension. Steamboat men say that within the area defined by these natural and artificial drains and highways, there are such an infinite number of traverse canals connecting the Mississippi with its lateral tributaries that a steamer drawing 5 feet without crossing its own path could traverse 3 or 4,000 miles of navigable waters. Again, this a steamer could travel 3 or 4,000 miles and never cross its own water path again. That's insane. The canal that connects Hushpuckney Bayou itself, in my judgment, excavated originally by the mound builders, with another in the Mississippi, passes through the plantation of the late Hon Andrew J. Donaldson. It is perfectly straight for 10 miles. There is a perfectly defined towpath upon its western bank, and mounds and fortified strongholds everywhere on either side of the perfect canal. What barbarians are we to close these endless drains and cheapest agencies of commerce and of perfect irrigation by means of earthen walls consisting incalculable sums and aggravating the very evils they are designed to remedy? So basically, he's saying, why are we destroying these? If intelligent explorations were made and a map of so called bayous prepared connecting the Mississippi with lateral streams. Now, remember, the article I just read probably should have came after this, because here's this author 40 years before that last article saying, why hasn't anyone made a map of these, right? And the gentleman, it took him 40 years to do it. How funny is that? Um, From the Missouri to the Gulf, we would find that this great valley was once drained by a perfect system of engineering skill, that these canals and lakes were so planned and so enlarged and lessened or multiplied that however great the volume of the springtime flood tide came of the mighty river, it was subdivided and distributed everywhere over this rich alluvial plains. Their productive capacity was thus renewed each year, and mound building cotton and wheat growers never beheld their fields behind earthen walls grow red or yellow and shriveled for want of loam deposited each year by the murky water that brings inexhaustible riches from the moat hills and valleys of mountains. You know what's really amazing too about that, you guys, is that they find a lot of this loam, the ancient loam, the stuff buried several layers down, contain a high level of radium. How funny is that, huh? Washing over the lands, fertilizing the crops. 140 natural and artificial drains or bayous once relieved the Mississippi of superabundant waters on its western side, between the mouth of the Arkansas and New Orleans. When the melting snows filled the channel of the great river, gateways were opened from Cape Girardeau to the sea, and many great canals, one after another, were filled. Shallow streams of regulated depth, as by Egyptians in days of yore, were diffused over cultivated fields, and not only were disasters impossible, but the floods we deem so ruinous were sources of incalculable riches to primeval dwellers of the lowlands. Red River then had an outlet, now reopened to Berwick's Bay, and those who have traversed Texas state that a great ditch still clearly defined. Yeah, these canals and water systems are man-made, and they're thousands and thousands and thousands of miles long, and they go from the Pacific Ocean all the way to the East Coast. The time will come when the Missouri will be connected with the Arkansas in this stream through Bayou Bartholomew with Red River, and the latter will become part of the Atchafalaya entering the Gulf of Mexico. A ship canal will connect Lake Michigan with the Illinois, and an inexhaustible water supply through the locks and dams be given the rivers of the valley. Steamships and the largest sailing vessels drawn through such a canal by locomotives on its towing paths will connect New Orleans directly with the Gulf of Mexico. American railways will bear the whole country's wealth towards cities on the Mississippi and its tributaries, and the river itself become the highway of nations, and its valley the central seat of the American empire. Yeah, we're gonna stop there. Holy smokes! Oh, I hadn't read that article in at least a year. It's great. Well, I hope I provided some fields of thought and some interesting information that maybe and hopefully was new to many of you. and kind of continuing to build the image that I've done so far over these 12 episodes now. What is this? Is this number 12? I should know, but I don't. Stop screen. 12, episode 12. Oh man. So yeah. Um Episode 12, wrapping it up there. Man, that was a lot of fun. I had been sitting on this presentation for so long I had completely forgot about it. So rereading through those was fantastic. Man, so much good stuff in there. I can't wait to go back through and chop this video up and make a bunch of little short videos with some of these um, some of these really powerful paragraphs. Man, I enjoyed that. I hope you guys did too. And what was our what was our turnout today? I didn't even look. Oh, 150. Awesome. I could be happier with that number. Taking a long break like that, people forget. And yeah, so appreciate it, each and every one of you. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed the information. Um, be sure to leave a comment if there's something you think I missed or something I want to that I need to look into. Mike, 13th Monkey, love you, man. I hope you enjoyed this one, Mike, because you were just popping in my head every time I was reading this. Like me and Mike have spent so many hours on Google Earth looking at how much of the Earth has been shaped by man and the canal structures and the river workings, and it's mind blowing. And to hear how much of this part of the Gulf has been obviously very much constructed and shaped by the hands of man is just crazy. But yeah, so um, I don't know if I'm going to do a vote. I think I'm just going to hop into Arkansas. Can't help myself saying Arkansas. I think I'm just going to jump into Arkansas because I want to get to Missouri, and I spent a lot of my younger summers in the South, and I have family in Tennessee, and that whole region is special to me. So I want to get to Missouri and Tennessee, and so I think I'm just going to skip the vote, and we're going to jump into Arkansas next week. Really excited for this one. I have so much material on Arkansas, and yeah, we're gonna continue on the Mississippi path here. I think this was a really these articles here kind of more so than even the Louisiana episode laid the groundwork for what the Mississippi is and how important it is, and the correlations between New and Old Worlds, river names, and what was really going on here pre 1600s, pre Columbus even. And but yeah, so 7:30. That was a pretty long episode. Appreciate you guys for sticking with me and listening through some of those long paragraphs. Those long reads can be tough, but yeah, look forward to your comments and what y'all think. And stay tuned for Arkansas next Tuesday. Looking forward to it. Love you all very much. Have a fantastic Tuesday. Take care, guys. Bye.